This presentation explores the ways in which the French wine industry has been negatively impacted by internal and external factors, such as government involvement and increasing competition in a global market. More, it demonstrates the proposed solutions for France, including creating a bridge to the Chinese wine industry, which has rapidly grown in popularity in recent years. Together with Italy and Spain, France is part of the old world in the wine sector, and since these three countries have dominated the industry, becoming the biggest producers of wine in volume around the world. Wine is seen as inseparable from the culture within France, and the wine industry is also crucial for the French economy as it generates employment and growth, especially in rural areas where economic activities are rare. However, the French wine industry has been experiencing a long-term decline in production and consumption since the 1970s. For example, production fell by 19% in volume in 2017. Our specific focus within France is Languedoc, a region in the south of France producing 1.7 billion bottles of wine per year and representing 5% of the global wine industry. The region is known for producing table wine, which is inexpensive to buy, and French families will drink it every day with a meal. Languedoc became an essential source for table wine, and generations of winemakers grew up in the area supplying that need. However, since the 1970s, France started importing in bulk from Spain, Italy, and the New World, which supplanted the need for the homegrown wine from Languedoc. This posed a real threat to smaller winemakers as foreign table wines was often much cheaper to buy in supermarkets. For example, Spanish table wine would cost less than half of what French table wine would cost. So this region and other regions within France started to rapidly lose business due to the surplus of wine being produced by global competitors. This surplus of wine became known as the wine lake from 2005. On top of this, an increasing number of Spanish wines were being labelled as French so they can be sold for higher prices. This also massively angered the traditional French winemakers. Due to this struggle to maintain a livelihood and compete with such a global competition, some of the winemakers united to form a violent activist group nicknamed Le Crave, creating terrorist acts not just fighting for their livelihood but their honour as well. The group have claimed responsibility for numerous attacks, including dynamiting a grocery store, a winery, the agricultural ministry offices in 2 cities, burning a car, hijacking a tanker, and destroying large quantities of non-French wine.
The Crave were demanding that the French government protect them from a rapidly globalising market by increasing subsidies and assistance in exports and increasing the rates for imports as well. But European Union rules limit how much help the French government can extend, and so in retaliation to this violence, the government urged growers to cut costs by swapping production for more expensive and higher quality wine. However, this caused issues as these weren't operations that can change strategy or cut production overnight. When analysing the French wine industry and the issues that were brought on through the globalisation of wine markets, including the terrorist acts of the Crave, it is important to acknowledge how this was intensified by France's national culture and its relationship with wine. When looking at Shine's model and the concept of underlying assumptions and values not being observable, it can be applied to the case of France, as their feelings of pride are so embedded in the winemaking sector. It is not just a business issue for them, it is also an attack on their tradition, as most winemakers have their vineyards passed down to them from generation to generation. This has been highlighted in the literature, as one winemaker has been quoted saying, "Each bottle of American and Australian wine that lands in Europe is a bomb targeted at the heart of our rich European culture." The Crave feel that their rich and historical culture is being taken away from them by competition from the New World. As a solution, French producers have started to produce organic wine as part of a strategy to meet new consumer demands as the market is set to grow by 14% each year until 2020. However, some French winemakers aren't able to adapt their strategies quickly, and so instead they have started to export their wines to China. A quarter of Languedoc wines are now being exported to China. This reduces the surplus of wine in France, whilst also expanding the market with minimum levels of risk.
When analysing the effects of this globalised market, it is important to acknowledge the cultural differences between China and France. We can use Hofstede's cultural dimensions to understand their individual cultures and interpret how they differ from one another, for example in terms of work ethic. On the left, we can examine the power distance of each country. Both have high PDIs. Many comparative studies have shown that French companies have normally 1 or 2 hierarchical levels more than other European countries. Similarly, China is renowned for having a large subordinate-superior gap, which helps to maintain a strict work ethic. Both countries believe people should not have aspirations beyond their rank. Uncertainty avoidance has to do with the way that society manages an uncertain future. China has a low uncertainty avoidance, meaning that ambiguity is not an issue and they are not risk adverse. However, the French score highly on the uncertainty avoidance index. This, matched with their high score in terms of power distance, requires organisations to have firm structures and enforce rules. In this diagram that contrasts France and China on multiple cultural dimensions, we can highlight individualism versus collectivism and long-term orientation. China possesses a very collectivist attitude as well as scoring highly in terms of long-term orientation. China's long-term oriented and collectivist mindset helps employees to remain patient when creating wine and managing the temperamental climate, as well as their loyalty to the vineyard. Looking once again at the diagram, we can see that France has a much more individualistic attitude compared to China, as well as having high uncertainty. France's individualistic mindset means that winemakers are focused on being innovative and standing out from the crowd, such as pursuing strategies to make their organic wine. Additionally, their high uncertainty avoidance is the cause of their desire to maintain cultural tradition and structures.
China was the 6th largest producer of wine in the world in 2019, predicted to become the 2nd largest by 2020. Despite the growing presence of Chinese wine producers, this graph shows the difference between how much wine is being consumed compared to how much is being made, demonstrating the large presence of imports within the Chinese market.
Imports account for 23% of consumption in China. Although some suggest this is largely due to the changing preferences of Chinese consumers, others say this is due to the lack of consumer trust in relation to the lengthy history of food safety problems within China, which means that if consumers have enough money, they tend to choose imported wine instead. On top of this, consumer trust was lost due to issues of counterfeiting, similar to those in France, which created uncertainty in the wine market. We believe that this lack of trust is the main challenge for the Chinese wine industry.
In order to combat this, the support of the Chinese government is essential. In the 1990s, they released key national standards to regulate hygiene practices of production. In 2011, the government created a plan to develop wine tourism in China in order to support the local wine industry with the aim of making it a world-class tourist location. In 2012, the importance of government intervention was highlighted once again by the Ministry of Agriculture, who are prioritising product quality and safety in the Chinese wine industry. In terms of addressing the challenge of changing consumer preferences, China is importing more than just wine from France. In 2001, it started to import French grapes, in particular one called Marcelin. This grape was largely disregarded in France. However, in China, it has been used to make wines well suited to the Chinese consumer preferences. Although these solutions helped solve key issues within China in order for Chinese producers to compete on a global scale, their best solution was to form alliances. As a mode of entry, these alliances meant that Chinese producers could use an incremental approach to enter the French market, one which was well suited to their culture due to their previously mentioned patient nature, and it allowed them to gather knowledge of the market they were entering. This alliance originally grew through the importing-exporting relationship between the two nations, which then led to more substantial alliances. Changgu Group, the leader of the Chinese wine market, formed their first strategic alliance in 2001 with French wine group Castel. Within this alliance, they launched premium wines that were exported to Europe, Japan, and the United States, demonstrating how international alliances can provide access to other markets. Together, the alliance also introduced the barrel ordering system as a mode of sale to the Chinese industry, demonstrating a resource synergy between the pair. This alliance also provided Changgu with the knowledge of the French market and how their culture was paramount to their success. This inspired them to build chateaux across China, as they believed that chateaux played an important role in defining the country as a reputable global wine competitor, like France. The first chateau was built in 2002 as part of the alliance with Castel, setting their wines apart from the rest.
To further develop their level of competitiveness, Changyu established an international chateau alliance in 2009, the first ever created in the world, which included chateaux based in France, New Zealand, and Italy. This alliance allowed Changyu to be the only seller in China of these wines, which meant that marketing channels were expanded, winemaking knowledge was shared, and sales levels were increased. This alliance also benefited France, as increased sales and exports helped to resolve the surplus of wine, which ignited the anger and frustration felt by the Crav. Lastly, Changyu have begun to acquire Castel chateaux based in France. This will not only strengthen their partnership, but will provide China with the environment to produce better wines and further improve the consumer perception of their product by adopting the reputation that high-quality French wines possess. The case of Chengdu is a key example of the Uppsala model, which suggests that a business's international expansion is a gradual process, dependent on experimental knowledge and incremental steps. However, the model is limited as it seems to only be applicable to larger businesses with greater resources who are able to undertake research into the market they are entering, like the company Chengdu. However, for small producers like those in France, they will not be able to gain as much knowledge and therefore will be entering alliances much more blindly. When evaluating China's international strategy and its impact on the French market, there are a few key positive and negative impacts to consider. Firstly, it aided France in managing surplus stock and improved global sales. This had a knock-on effect by diluting the issues for the Crav. Their unique alliance helped to create more beneficial capabilities for both France and China, including a new shared knowledge and improved reputation for the Chinese wine industry. The negative impacts include Chinese winemakers taking over family-owned French vineyards and chateaux, which again threatens their livelihood and culture. Finally, as the Chinese adopt the French culture surrounding wine, their products become more homogenous, which could upset the traditional and individualistic French winemakers. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed.